Welcome. This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this Honourable Chairman was in Standing Finance Committee debating the Appropriation Bill 2026. We return to the Appropriation Bill 2026.
Standing Finance Committee is now resumed. Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, good afternoon to you and to your team. There have been a lot of questions around, I believe, for the most part, one aspect of your ministry. You are the Minister of the Ministry of Labour, Social Security, and the third sector. And we've only just very briefly touched on one small portion of the third sector, mainly the faith or religious aspect of it. And I wanted to ask if you can provide an overview of what the portfolio under your ministry for the third sector entails, what services are provided under your ministry for the third sector.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member, and I recognize the genuine nature of your question, coming as it does from an organization that you led, which concerned itself with the important work of the third sector. And I say it that way because I am starting by indicating that the Caribbean Policy Development Center, CPDC, is a partner of the ministry in its work. I'm going to allow the coordinator who works with the third sector organizations to expand on the work that we do. But to say from a government policy perspective, we see our work as facilitating the development of the third sector. It comes from a place that says it is not possible for a government and a government bureaucracy, so I'm saying two things, government generally, but a government bureaucracy to address all the issues that need to be addressed in a country. The way that I've said it over the years, not all of my officers like my phrasing of it, but I say that very often the kind of passion that comes out of those persons who start NGOs, CBOs, community-based organizations, civil society organizations, generally the third sector, it is not easy, and I'm not even sure if it's possible, to replicate the passion. And so, as a government, we would want to ensure, one, that those persons are able to achieve what they want to achieve, because many of these organizations are formed out of lived experiences. So, I have, I'm going to use something outrageous just to prove the point because I don't want to point to specifics, but I have an allergy to water. And it affects me so much that I start an organization to address the issue. Now, because it is my lived reality, what I put into it is not very easy to replicate, especially by those who don't have a similar lived reality. So that we see our responsibility as ensuring that civil society organizations, the third sector, are facilitated to the point where they can deliver on the dreams, the aspirations, the mandate of the organization. We also see our responsibility as building the capacity of those organizations to deliver on said mandate. And it is from that space that we see our work as facilitators. We are also aware that third sector organizations often reach into places and spaces that government agencies, government departments, government ministries cannot reach or cannot easily reach. There are many people who will be more open with persons from third sector organizations than there would be to a government official. People sometimes see government officials as trying to get into their business. Whereas in third sector organizations, people very often freely share of their experiences. And so we see the third sector as an important arm of the work of developing the nation and as partners in national development. And from that perspective, we have done a number of things in terms of capacity building and other areas, but I will allow Coordinator Farley to share some more detail about what we do as a ministry with respect to the third sector.
Rhonda Farley, Coordinator in the Ministry of Labour, Social Security and the Third Sector. And following on from what Minister Jordan is saying, much of the work with regard to capacity building for this sector, the ministry has been working in collaboration with a number of partners. The minister mentioned the CPDC. We've also been working with the ILO. We've worked with the IDB. And more recently, we're working with ICAB, Business Barbados. So we've done a number of training programs to improve the capacity. We've looked at proposal writing. We've looked at financial management, risk management, governance, basic accounting. We've done a series on the accounting because we recognize that a number of the organizations are challenged in terms of their reporting to Business Barbados, CAIPO. So we've done that on an annual basis. We've also looked at governance also on an annual basis. We have done some additional work with the ILO in terms of looking at building sustainability. So the ILO has a program which they run through the Trinidad office, which speaks to building entrepreneurship. So we have been seeking to adopt a model similar to that for the sector, so charities and nonprofits then can build an entrepreneurial arm in terms of having a more sustainable outlook for the organization. We also have been working with ICAB, the Institute of Chartered Accountants for Barbados. As I said before, a number of the organizations have challenges in terms of reporting on their financials. So we have started a pilot program with ICAB where we offer at various levels assistance. So it could be free or you pay a nominal fee, or the ministry pays at the second level. The third level, that you pay a small fee to have your audit or your financials done. And we are doing that on a one-off basis, I say, because as you know, they're over, the last statistics we had from Business Barbados were over 2,000 charities and nonprofits. So we are trying to assist them in ensuring that they have their financials in order. This year, in terms of upcoming programs, we also be looking at the care economy in terms of doing completing an assessment. That work is going to be done with the ILO to see what is happening in that sector. So that is what we'll be looking to do in the upcoming year, as well as to continue the capacity building efforts and to work with the building the sustainability across the sector, and the ILO Start and Improve Your Business program.
Thank you very much. If I may add, Honourable Member, you heard the coordinator speak to the matter of entrepreneurship, working with the ILO. I'm not sure if she spoke to working with the Small Business Association in Barbados, but she did mention the matter of funding and sustainable funding. The challenge that many third sector organizations have is located right there. And so we have, as part of our work with the International Labour Organization, ILO, we embraced the matter of social and solidarity economy to the extent where when that matter was on the agenda of the International Labour Conference, 2 of the 4 officers of the committee were from Barbados. The General Secretary as the worker spokesperson, General Secretary of BWU, and I as rapporteur, so that we were able to gain a lot from that interaction. We recognize, even though we were focused on decent work in the social and solidarity economy, we recognize that the social and solidarity economy is important to develop if organizations will be able to sustain the work that they are so passionate about. So that, to give an example of what has happened in the past in Barbados, we know that Pinelands Creative Workshop, to use an example, had the bicycle project. And they also had a construction project. Those projects were for gain, but not for profit. And the gains were to be used to fund the charitable work of the organization. We recognize that that is essential. We do not want to reduce our third sector organizations to be beggars. We believe that we can build out a social and solidarity economy. And as a result of that, our interaction at the International Labour Conference, the definition for SSC, actually that is used internationally now, adopted by the UN General Assembly, is one that we crafted in that space. And we have made sure that we will move forward with that by including it as an important component in our Decent Work Country program. So that as that program with the ILO unfolds, there will be work that relates to the matter of the social and solidarity economy. It will include cooperatives, and that was one of the reasons why I raised the matter of cooperatives when the Ministry of Business, Energy and Business was in the well, because these parts must work together so that we can build out sectors allowing third sector organizations the resources that are necessary for them to execute on their mandate.
Thank you, Minister. There was mention of a number of training programs which seem to be one of the primary planks for your delivery for capacity building. How are you actually monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of that and the extent to which there is substantive change then, again, in the capacity of the organizations you're serving?
Again, I allow the coordinator to speak to that, but one of the ways that I gauge from the ministerial perspective, from the minister's perspective, is either the repeating, new persons coming into the programs, new organizations coming into the programs, or if the same persons are coming back each time. In my head, if the same persons are coming back each time, it tells me that the training may not be effective. But my information is that we're getting new participants in the program. However, we are aware that we have to, people will need retraining from time to time, because most of our third sector operators, I use that if you want a better term, most of the people who lead in these organizations are not full-time in the organization. So they're not applying themselves to using that information day in, day out. There are times when in the evening or on a weekend they use something and they spend a lot of time trying to move their organizations forward, but not always able to apply the information that is gained. So there's an element of retraining that will need to happen. With respect to formal measurement, I'm not aware of a system of formally measuring the impact of the transmission of information. If it is getting through, if it is making the substantive difference. Like I said, how I've addressed the matter at this point, this might be a resource limitation matter as well, but how I address it is to see what kind of, who we are reaching. Measuring governance, for example, we will, and this is probably the only, well, governance and accounting as well. We intend to measure this, and we've been having interactions with what is now Business Barbados. There was a time in November or December of 2019, when pages of third sector organizations were listed in the print media to be taken off the record because they hadn't submitted annual returns for some time. And that was one of the reasons that caused us to develop a partnership with ICAB to make sure that these organizations, a number of them cannot afford a formal audit, but they need to provide financial information. And ICAB, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, has been kind enough and gracious enough, as coordinator indicated, to, in some cases, for the very small organizations, produce the financials for free. And as organizations are a little bit larger, or a little bit more able to prepare those financials for a very small fee, in most cases, a nominal fee. And that has been working. The understanding that I have is that more organizations are compliant than used to be. And that is one of the measurements. But I go back to answer your question more frontally. We do not have a formal system of measurement. But I'll ask the coordinator to interject if there's additional information she can share.
I just wish to add to what the minister is saying. In terms of the sessions, the capacity building that we've been doing, we've seen interest outside of the regular persons or organizations that would attend. We started off initially with some smaller numbers, and those numbers are growing. We tend not to, in terms of like, say, for governance or accounting, try to ensure that we select new organizations coming into the training and try to ensure too that the persons who are being trained are the persons who are dealing directly with the accounting or on the boards and so on specific. So we're seeing new persons, and we're also hearing from persons a keen interest in attending particularly the workshops, the face-to-face workshops that we have, right? And also, sorry, let me just add, because we started off doing some webinars with Business Barbados in terms of helping persons to understand what are their legal requirements and so on. And for those webinars, and the last one we did was with BRA as well, we've seen an increase in the number of persons. But as the minister said, we haven't done a formal assessment to measure.
Thank you, Minister. If I can suggest that perhaps we need to work with CPDC a little bit more, and they can perhaps help to guide you just in terms of how to do that formal measurement. Many non-governmental organizations, because they have to raise 100% of their funds and have to be accountable to their funders, have to be able to report on the effectiveness of their program, and we should be able to do so. And I say that because I note that under this particular sub-program, Secretariat for the Third Sector Activities, and as you've alluded to, sorry, Minister, as the Director would have alluded to, you are looking to do some programs, I think, for this particular upcoming financial year, as you know, the Secure Economy Assessment. But you've moved from an approved estimate of just about 31,000 a revised estimate of about 55,000, and for this financial year, it's about 205,000. I don't know if an assessment covers that significant jump, so I would just like to understand what it is that you're doing, particularly if you're saying to me you're going to be offering more training programs that you haven't necessarily measured the effectiveness of.
Well, I can't say anything different than I said before with respect to the measurement. What I would say is that we are intending to have more training, more capacity building. We will at the same time work to be able to assess the impact of what we both are doing now, will be doing, but the impact of what has happened in the past. Not having that will not stop us though from continuing. So we see this as a walking and chewing gum kind of thing. We have to continue with the capacity building because the third sector organizations we interact with have indicated to us that these are some of the areas. They have to write a proposal. So we see this in a very pointed way with working with another department in the ministry, the one that program manager is responsible for people development. In that subhead, there is provision for third sector grants. One of the challenges that we have had is that the proposals, sometimes you have what you can, if you really think about it, a decent proposal, but not very, sorry, I should put it a different way, a decent idea, but not a proposal that is not properly crafted. So it feels like a good idea, but it is not presented, and you can't almost empirically say that it is a good idea. And coming out of those kinds of interactions, we recognize where the needs are. So I spoke to you about through the chair, I spoke to you about the organizations that were to be taken off the record, so to speak. A lot of that was financial, and that's where we put a lot of attention on the financial side. And then with respect to the presentation of ideas and projects, we raise another need area. So we will up the ante, to use a cliche, in terms of that kind of training, but we recognize that we have to make sure that the additional taxpayer dollars that we are put into that training make sense, that that we are seeing the benefits. We're going to do that formally, but we are also going to use, I shouldn't say but, and we are also going to use an assessment of the quality of proposals that come in what is an annual call for proposals for the third sector grant under people development. We are going to monitor if we see improvements in the quality of the programs that are presented and the way that they're crafted, the quality of presentation, because we're going to use that to make an assessment on how well our third sector organizations are positioned to go outside of Barbados to ask for grants from the various organizations, for example, the ones that CPDC will go to. We will engage with CPDC. CPDC has been a good partner, and we will continue. We know that we have 2 members of the cabinet who were former leaders of CPDC, and the minister was a former trustee in one of CPDC's programs. So we have been calling on them. As a matter of fact, the work that we have done so far with respect to third sector legislation has been based on a white paper that came through CPDC. CPDC organized they did all the groundwork, and then they prepared the white paper. That is the white paper that we have been using and continue to use for the legislation. So I say that only to speak to the relationship that we already have, but we will, as we speak to the impact of the training and the capacity building, be going back to them for that assistance. So thank you very much for that.
Chair, I have one more follow-up. Yeah?
Once it's a follow-up.
Yes, it is a follow-up. So you spoke about the NGO legislation, which I know has been in a state of being worked on for some time. Can you give any assurance that we will soon see that come to fruition?
Soon is not a term that I recognize in my leadership of the ministry. The officers will tell you that. And I don't want to break rank with precedence where that is concerned. But what I will say to you is that I am pretty sure that once we get back a response from the Office of the Attorney General, that it should not take us more than 6 to 9 months to be able to move forward. And when I say move forward, I'm talking about getting approval at the cabinet level, the discussion and then approval on what the drafting instructions will be, having the legislation drafted, and again, we're not starting from scratch because there are other pieces of third sector legislation around, and coming to this honorable chamber. So the areas that we have some level of control over, I believe should take us no more than 6 to 9 months once we hear back from the Office of the Attorney General. The Office of the Attorney General has to make sure that whatever we do, and I know how CPDC feels, the current officer in charge, about all the OECD, and we have international organizations appearing to look the wrong places for certain things. Nobody ever launders billions or multiple millions through small non-governmental organizations. But we still have to adhere to all these rules that really apply to Rockefeller Foundation and Gates Foundation, and we ain't got none of them here. But the rules are kind of across the board. There is a rule number that that's not coming to my mind at this point. The officer in charge at CPDC calls it pretty often to me. But where we are now with the Office of the Attorney General, once we come back, I would say half a year, maximum 9 months, and we should have, so the aim is to have legislation before this chamber by the end of this calendar year. That's what I would say. I'm not sure if that qualifies honorable members soon, but that is, I prefer to use actual dates.
I wasn't sure that helped me with the Zoom, but we will hold that as much as possible. Thank you very much, Minister. I rest here.
Thank you. Honorable member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Minister, to you and your team. And let me first begin by commending the grace and usual professionalism and depth and width of knowledge you exhibit on these matters, as well as your technical officers. Minister, this is not directly related to your ministry per se in terms of the estimates, but it was part of the functions given to your ministry. And I want to speak about the allowances within recent times that your ministry has been given responsibility for. Specifically, I ask about, first, the solidarity allowance, where every Barbadian over a certain age was promised $300. And that was the one-off allowance given the performance of, I think it was our corporate taxes. This started sometime in May 25 or so. And I know that NAS was responsible for discharging this most important responsibility. The last I had heard, there were over 200,000 Barbadians that received the allowance. But while I was canvassing in the last election, and prior to that as well, but while I was canvassing, definitely, I came across a number of persons. And those persons had expressed to me that they had not received the allowance. Some had gone to NAS multiple times. In fact, I met a young man coming from the Ministry of Health, which is in the same building as the NAS. And he had now been coming from the NAS to report a third time that he had not received his allowance. And I think what he was being told was that it was pending. And I like you, pending, I believe that pending must have an end date. So I just want to know, Minister, through you, what is the status of of that allowance? How many people received it? Are there still people who haven't received it? Why they haven't received it? Because there are a number of Barbadians who are very concerned about that allowance from the government, which, as you know, made a significant difference to individuals.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. And like you, I also have some constituents who have not received, and I hear it from time to time. The last time was actually at a church service. I know the question wasn't asked with relation to having money for the collection, but the 300 is something that people have been looking forward to, and you are correct that the vast majority of persons entitled have received. The role of the ministry responsible for Social Security and the National Insurance and Social Security Service is, like you indicated, administering. So we take funds from central government and we pass on. We have been careful because we recognize the responsibility we have to the funds contributed by workers to the National Insurance Fund to make sure that there is absolute separation between the funds from central government and the funds from the National Insurance Fund, or that make up the National Insurance Fund. As a result, we make our payments once we have the funding from central government. And if there is any delay at all, then it will delay, the delay will pass through. But I am assured that those persons who are outstanding, well, those payments to persons, the payments that are outstanding are going to be addressed. I think there's an attempt to have that done by on or before the end of April. That will depend a little bit less on us and more on making sure that we have the funding in place to make those payments. But there are small numbers of persons, of people, but we understand that even if it were one or two, those one or two people are entitled, they should have their funds, and as the intermediary, we will continue to work as hard as we can to make sure that we have those persons, we know who those persons are, and that we have the funds to be able to transfer the payments.
Thanks, Minister. My constituents, I'm sure like yours, will be very happy to hear, hopefully by the end of April, all things being equal, that they will be compensated. Sticking to allowances, my other question, or grants, my other question now is in relation to something that's obviously very close to my heart, and I know to yours, which is the disability grant on allowances.
Honourable Member, did I hear you correctly?
This is a follow-up question, sir. Directly related to the grants and allowances.
I thought I heard the opposite.
Huh?
I thought I heard the opposite. You may proceed.
My apologies. I did not frame it well, sir, but I'm happy to see you're paying attention. As usual. So, sir, the question that I'm asking, the follow-up question, again in relation to the fact that NAS is responsible for discharging other government revenue, is in relation to the special needs grants and allowance. When this grant was started, as you know, we wanted to disburse to persons with autism, disability, with Down syndrome, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, and then we extended it. And I wanted to know, or I wanted through you, for you to be able to inform the public. To what extent has that been successful? How many persons have actually benefited from the special needs grant through your ministry? The concern that was expressed to me in my other portfolio, what I held, the Ministry of People Empowerment, was sometimes the time that it took between the application for the grant and the time they received it. So if through you, again, the country could be updated on the role, first of all, of the NASS in that particular procedure, but also to what extent have we been able to reach persons with disabilities that had been the persons who we wanted to benefit directly from that intervention.
I'll allow the Chief Operating Officer of the National Insurance and Social Security Service to speak to the numbers, just to say that I think, like with most things, right at the beginning, so if my memory serves me correctly, this might have been October of 2024. Right at the beginning, we had some challenges. And with your help and your ministry's help, we were able to work through a number of them. So there were some delays initially. We had first to make sure that we had all the proper diagnoses. As a matter of fact, one of the things that caused the extension to other categories of disability were some of the challenges that came out of the initial phase where a person is not able to work. So we knew why we put it in place. I mean, Honourable Member, you led in that area along with Ministry of Finance. We knew why. So the question became, but I don't have one of these 4 disabilities, but I'm not able to work. You've presented this as assistance for persons who, because of a disability, cannot earn or cannot earn at the same level. So that there was a lot of back and forth over whether or not this disability rose to the level of the initial 4 areas, and then if it did or if it didn't, because I'll tell you that the officers of the National Insurance and Social Security Service are strict guardians of the funds. I'm putting that as mildly as I can. Strict guardians of the funds, of any funds that pass through the National Insurance and Social Security Service. I know that not just as minister, but I know that as a former board member. And so they are very, very, sometimes very, 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 very careful with respect to disbursements. That approach will automatically cause some level of delay because there's a level of certainty that needs to be reached before any money passes through. So we had that at the beginning. I'll say though that after the first about 6 months, I think once we got to the early part of 2025, it started to become a pretty smooth operation because by that time, I believe most people with disabilities had signed up, both adults and minors. As we know, it applies to the special needs grant, applies both to adults and minors. Most had signed up. There were persons who were not aware of the ability of minors to do it, to sign up, or the possibility of parents signing up on behalf of their minors who may not have been able to sign up. And after the first few months, we were able to smooth out to a pretty significant degree. And then once the range of disabilities was broadened, that it became much easier to administer. But we did, like with most things, have those initial teething issues. I'll ask the Chief Operating Officer to speak probably more specifically to the numbers of people who we have been able to assist using the funds of central government. Again, I am always careful to indicate that in these, and that is the connection with the 2 questions, all of these funds are central government funds that the service is administering. I have to be clear to say that because in our revitalization exercise, the matter of stewardship of the funds of the National Insurance Scheme was always on the front burner in terms of area of concern of the public. And so we had to make sure, and we always have to make sure, that we indicate to the public where these funds are coming from. So just like with the Solidarity Allowance, the Special Needs Grant, these funds come from central government, essentially from taxpayer dollars. Solidarity Allowance mainly from corporate, and the Special Needs Grant, both corporate and individual taxpayer. But I turn over to the Chief Operating Officer.
Francis Fontenelle Walcott once again, National Insurance Office, Chief Operations Officer. In terms of the Special Needs Grant, In 2024, we paid 744 recipients. 2025, 1,062. And up to this year, current pension period, which began today, we disbursed payments of 1,083 persons. And the breakdown of that, we disbursed to 625 minors, 458 adults, 745 males and 338 females.
Sorry, numbers are being lost. I'm very sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
Let's speak into the
slow down a
mic. The
bit.
numbers are being lost.
Pardon? Sorry. Okay. 2024, 748 persons were paid. 2025, 1,062. And this year, up to this pension period, which began today, 1,083 persons. 625 minors, 458 adults were paid this pension period, this pension cycle.
And the reason why the current number is important is because this grant is not a grant that stops unless it is a disability that you can get rid of or that goes away. So that the current number tells us where we've come from and where we are on a continuing basis. And that number will increase only as people with disabilities, with new disabilities. I think we're at the point now where only the new disabilities will come onto the table.
Chair, I have no more questions. I just want to reinforce how important, I think, as obviously the minister has made it clear that he's aware, how important it is for us to discharge this responsibility with great efficiency. Because by and large, the persons that we chose to cover with the disabilities grant, as you said, have no other source, in many cases, of income, and depend on the regularity, the consistency, and the ease of being able to receive it in the first place, to be able to live. And so I think that has to be considered one of the great achievements, also of the NASS. Because after as you said, the initial bumpy period, I think there's been some regularity in relation to how people were able to receive these funds and making a significant difference to our most vulnerable. So thank you very much, Minister. I yield, sir. That's it, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister and your team. Just one question, really. Last week, I had some queries from a couple of young constituents, and I just posited that question here. The farm labor program, is it still going? It may be called another name, but I know it as the farm labor program. Is it still going? And if so, what is the process to be able to get involved in the program?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Your use of the name recognizes that you go back pretty far. We call it now the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, but a lot of Barbadians still recognize the Farm Labor Program, particularly persons in your age group and older. But that program is still going. I'm going to allow the director of the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service, under whose aegis it falls, to respond. But to set a little bit of the context, we, for the last maybe 2 years, have been living in a different world with respect to the view of people, their view of migrants, including migrant workers, including short-term or seasonal migrant workers. There was a time when Canada was seen as a place that was liberal with respect to its view on migration and its view of migrants and migrant workers. We have had what appears to be some level of a philosophical shift. Some people refer to it as that, but there are others who see it as a coming to the fore of what had been latent, that there has always been a discomfort with migration. Unfortunately, we see it sometimes in Barbados as well. And our full free movement and the response in some quarters to that speaks to that view. And then the comment that I refer to as one of the worst comments that I've ever heard in public life, ever so welcome it for a call, I think is probably the worst comment that I've heard from any leader at any time since I've been alive. And, but that speaks to what we're seeing in Canada. And so you're going to hear the numbers from the director, but we continue to work to keep the program going. We have really good solidarity with the other countries in the Caribbean that are part of the program: Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, the OECS as a group, because the OECS operates as a group, more functional, it seems, than CARICOM is, or appears to be sometimes. And they operate, we all operate together to make sure that the Canadian government understands how we view the program, how important it is. I will say on the, not the conceptual side, but the broader operational side, it is recognized by a lot of the farmers in Canada to be an excellent example of what government-industry cooperation could look like. So that every year, governments who supply workers, the Canadian government, which is the host country, and the farmers, those in the industry in Canada, come together and go through the contract so that the program benefits from having always an up-to-date contract. Whenever situations are changing, that has contributed to the longevity of the program in a significant way, because it is one that causes the program to be nimble, and we've had the benefit of being able to contribute because we sit at the table as equal partners. The Canadian government will chair the meetings, but we sit as equal partners, and we are able to have workers in Canada, not just in the seasonal agricultural worker program, but there's also the umbrella program called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. That Temporary Foreign Worker Program has workers in horticulture, it has workers in meat processing, it has workers in hospitality. And we have, at different points in time, been able to have Barbadian workers exposed to areas other than agriculture in the Canadian labor market. Before the director speaks, the last thing I will say is that coming out of the war in Ukraine, we've had a situation where the Canadian government, and this is, I'm veering away a little bit from agriculture into hospitality, but the Canadian government, because it accepted refugees, persons fleeing the conflict and the effects of the conflict, those persons have been prioritized because sufficient that they are already living in the country, that is in Canada. The Canadian government has sought to ensure that they do not become a burden on the state for the very same reasons that to people coming in. And so the Canadian government, we can see, is operating very cautiously where this is concerned, and we've recognized that a number of those migrants have taken some of the positions, particularly in hospitality, that Barbadian workers once took. But that notwithstanding, we have continued to make our voices heard at the very highest levels, meeting with ministers of government. I do that from time to time in Canada, and I do it every time there's an international labor conference. We speak to whoever is the minister from Canada who goes to the meeting to make sure that they understand that we value the relationship. It is one that goes back to 1966. Barbados joined in 1967. So it is a program that is very, very long in the tooth, and one that has benefited all parties, Canada, the farmers, and Barbadian workers. I'll turn over to the Director of BEX.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maureen Boyne, Acting Director of the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service. In terms of the seasonal agricultural program, as the Minister alluded to, we have seen some reductions in the numbers over the last 2 years in particular, and this is mainly to the global environment in relation to immigration and in most recent times, the introduction of tariffs. So what is not that you're not hearing about the program, but what is actually happening is that because there's a reduction in the numbers, employers are requesting what we would call repeat workers. So you don't have many opportunities for new workers to go on the program. So you're getting a lot of repeat workers because obviously the employers are comfortable with persons who know the farm and the operations and who are familiar with the process. So the whole element of having to train new people, that would not be an issue. So I can share with you some of the numbers. In 2024, we had 102 workers under the seasonal agricultural program. In 2025, we had a decline and saw 86 persons. So far for 2026, we have seen a request for 59 workers. But we are not resting on our laurels because we realize we have to be strategic because, as the Minister said, it's a very competitive environment. We are competing against other Caribbean countries. But what we have done is being strategic in terms of looking further north, because one of the other factors is the unemployment rate. If the unemployment rate in a particular province is 6%, it means that they have to hire in-country. They can't hire persons from Barbados and the other Caribbean islands. So we've been looking at developing strategic partnerships, for example, with New Brunswick. So we have a new employer who we are currently processing workers for, and this is in the area of seafood. And we have 16 Barbadian workers who are due to travel to that region early April. They were here in Barbados in December, and they actually did the interviews in person here in Barbados. So even though in the numbers we're seeing a reduction, we know there is still scope for growth, and we are going after those provinces, going out in those areas where we know, yes, it may be a little further out, a little colder, but where we know there are opportunities there as well. In terms of the actual signing up process, it is pretty straightforward, and thankfully, what we have done through a mandate from Cabinet in recent times is to develop the Barbados Job Register. So anyone who is interested can log on to that website and they can register. And of course, you're free to come into the office. That's what we're here for, because we know that everybody's not computer literate. So persons can come in. The sign-up process is pretty straightforward, and we will say to you what are the requirements. Typically, for any employer, you need to have a clean police certificate of character. You have to have a valid passport so that you can travel, and we will walk you through the process. So I would say to anyone who is interested, even though the numbers may be down, sometimes opportunities come up quickly, and you have to move really quickly to place a person. So it would be good to make sure that you're registered with us and your application is in place so that if we have to call you quickly and move quickly, we can get that done. So the program is still here and around, and we're working hard to bring the numbers back up, but just using different approaches.
Thank you very much. If I may add, I think I need to use this opportunity to commend the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. The Consul General in Toronto has been very active working with our liaison service in Toronto, well, based in Toronto, to help us move into some of these new areas. And I am using this public forum to express thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, particularly the Consul General for Barbados at Toronto. I also will use the opportunity, Mr. Chair, talking about the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, to say that my ministry has a zero tolerance for anybody who misbehaves in the market, that is in the overseas place. So I say misbehaves, that is not necessarily only from the employer's perspective, but from after our investigation as well. And I'm speaking almost specifically to drug use. It appears to us that in spite of what we say in our orientation, there are some persons who believe that because of the liberal view in Canadian society with respect to cannabis use, that Canada is a place of freedom when it comes to smoking. I think I use this opportunity because it is public, and I hope that beside the orientation, I can get the message out. There is no employer, as far as I'm aware, who allows smoking of cannabis or work while under the influence of cannabis, smoked cannabis, to work. And because of the challenges with the program, the ministry that I lead does not have, not that we would otherwise, but we do not have any bandwidth to allow for misbehavior. So we do not allow 3 strikes and out, right? Once you strike, you're out. And that is how it will continue to be. And the reason for that very strict approach is because it is very easy to destroy a program like this, or destroy our opportunity for participating in a program like this. I say that because we used to think in the English-speaking Caribbean that our first language of English was a significant advantage. We have come to realize that there are farmers whose first language is English, second language is French, and they are very, very happy to employ only Mexicans or only people from El Salvador or Guatemala, so that we have to make sure, we have to guard the program. And I'm appealing through you, Mr. Chair, to those who would want to participate. So I say to the Honourable Member for St. John, through you as well, those persons who would want to participate, just let's make sure that they know that this is a program we value. It has brought significant advancement to many people in Barbados over the many years from the late 1960s when we were involved, and we have to guard it very, very carefully. I've said to the officers that they are not to accept name dropping, because we know how things work in Barbados. It's a small place. I have given them the authority, I don't know if I had to, but I give them the authority to ignore name dropping, so that it doesn't matter who sends somebody. If they're suitable to be considered, they will be. If they are not, they will not be considered, regardless of who sent them. And I send that very publicly in this place to everybody who wishes to hear. Thank you very much.
Final question. Minister, I assume that the process is gender neutral, correct?
You will have to explain, Honourable Member, what you mean by a process being gender
Females
neutral.
and males are sourcing the program, or is it only males?
No. Females and males, men and women are allowed into the program, unless there is some specific request from an employer. Now remember that we do not determine at the ministry who is employed. We have a role to play in screening. Some employers Well, there may be one or two who will allow us to select, but generally speaking, employers will either come here, as Director Bowen said, or in some cases have done it electronically, over the internet, over Zoom or some other platform. So generally speaking, the employer determines who the employer wants. I have not become aware of any situation so far, at least in my tenure, where we've seen discrimination on the basis of gender.
Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. I have one question. It may be deemed a simple question, but it's really a pet peeve for me. Oftentimes, I happen to look in the papers, like most Barbadians, and I see an ad and making special reference to the fact that there is no suitable candidate for a job that was advertised locally, and hence the institution, business, etc., are seeking to, our institutions are seeking to go elsewhere outside of Barbados to fill these posts. And in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of Barbadians, these jobs like bellman, chef, I see some as far as looking for teachers, jobs where we would consider the average jobs for Barbadians. I want to know if your ministry is aware of this, and what is your ministry looking to do to ameliorate something that is seen as a serious situation for us Barbadians. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I'm sure your first question is a rhetorical one. You asked if we are aware. So I'm pretty sure you are not looking for an answer to that. You really want us to focus on the second part of the question, because we are Barbadians, so we read the newspapers. But the matter of our involvement at the level of work permits and the granting of work permits. Now, granting of work permits lies with the Ministry of Home Affairs, the ministry responsible for immigration. From our perspective, though, we recognize that we can contribute to a certain level of fairness in the labor market, because the labor market is our concern. While the issuing of work permits does not fall within our purview, we still have a responsibility to make sure that we have an efficiently functioning labor market. And labor market means exactly what it is. Any other market, a market for fresh produce or for meat or for whatever, you want to be functioning effectively. The same goes for the labor market. I explained a little bit because sometimes we use terms, and I am pretty sure that not everybody understands what we mean, because we get into our little circles and use these terms. But the demand for workers is demand. The supply of workers is supply. That's what creates the actual market. The ministry that I have the honor to lead is responsible for ensuring that there is a well-functioning labor market, so that people who want work can get work or have opportunities to get work, and people who are looking for workers can find those workers. Now, two things with respect to work permits. The ministry responsible for immigration, and I believe it's probably directly through the immigration department, will from time to time approach the ministry to find out if there is, or if there are persons who fit a particular job requirement. And once the ministry is in receipt of that kind of request, we act to make sure that we get back to immigration and to give them the information. However, we recognize that there was some level of inefficiency where that was concerned because you have sometimes to go back through paper or email applications, and that is not conducive to good information or speedy delivery of information. And so the establishing of the Barbados Job Register is integral to facilitating a well-functioning labor market. We have called and we continue to call, and I use this opportunity to call again for persons who are seeking employment. It doesn't have to be looking for your first job. It could be that you are in a job, but you want a job in a different area, or you're in a job that it is not the area that you studied for, but you took it because you can't find none else, as we would say. All persons who are looking for employment, we invite to sign up with the Barbados Job Register, on the Barbados Job Register. We have, and I'll ask the Director Bex to give some more information on the numbers, but quite a number of persons have signed up, or you may have already, I'm not sure, but you can repeat. A significant number of persons have signed up, and with respect to employers, we have an increasing number of employers who are using the job register to find persons to fill vacancies. We recognize that many employers get overwhelmed with once they put an ad out, with the number of applications that they get. So the job register helps us to be able to sift through some of those, but with specific respect to persons applying for work permits, what the Barbados Job Register allows us to do is to have a platform that we can go to and identify persons who have indicated an interest in a particular area or who are qualified in a particular area, because sometimes, persons may miss the ad, or the ad may have been so small that you just went over it. But the Barbados Job Register allows us, when we interact with immigration, to be able to say to them, these are people, or we don't have anybody who's expressed an interest. When we set up the Barbados Job Register, we did it in association with the Immigration Department as well. All the stakeholders were involved, and at the Immigration Department, and I don't think anything has changed even with a change in minister, because this is really how it was built. The understanding is that a work permit will not be granted unless there's a search of the Barbados Job Register. I'll ask the Director Bex to just give an indication of how many people have signed up, how many employers we have on the platform at this time.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Maureen Boyne, Acting Director of the Barbados Employment and Career Counseling Service. The Barbados Job Register was officially launched in August 2025, the latter part of August 2025. By the end of February this year, we have close to 2,800 persons registered on the platform, 140 employers. And the whole purpose of setting up this platform was to provide a mechanism by which potential job seekers could register, submit their resumes electronically, post information on their skills, experience, etc. And so that employers, in turn, would be able to see that information, search for that information, and use it to fill possible vacancies. We have taken it a step further since that initial launch through a public procurement consultancy. We are currently still coming towards the back end of working with an overseas IT developer to develop what we will call like the second phase of the job register, where now employers can go on and they can actually post their vacancies in lifetime. We can use AI for job matching. we within the unit, BEX, we too can also post information on upcoming workshops, events, so that you have greater reach. So we're transitioned now into phase 2, where we would have sent notices out to job seekers, letting them know they can now log on and create a profile. Similar, the same thing for employers. So we have seen a pretty good response. A variety of sectors are now on the job register, including, I can name a few: construction, financial services, technology, retail, and hospitality. In terms of the job seekers, the 3 top areas are customer service, computer skills, and data entry. But our task now going forward, and we did a bit of it last year, well, not a bit, quite a bit of it last year. We were out there doing outreach, because like with everything, you have to inform the public. You have to keep people, keep them up to date, basically, on what you're doing. One of the biggest catchment areas where we got a lot of applications was through the NIS, the unemployment section. We also would have done outreach with training institutions like the Barbados Vocational Training Board, SJPI, BCC. We went to some of the private institutions as well. So we have been out there promoting the job register. We know there's more work to be done, and we want to continue to do that work with available funding in the new financial year. One of the things we want to address, and like I say to the team, it is a lot about relationship building, how you relate to employers. And one of the things we have to develop is that feedback loop, because persons are using the register, but we are not getting enough information in a timely manner as to how many vacancies you would have filled. We know we've been told there are about 43 so far, based on the companies who we've been in contact with, who have indicated that they've used the job register to place persons. So we have to do some more work in that area. We don't just rely on the technology. Persons can log on, as ministers say, but we also invite persons to come in the office, because we are aware that everybody's not computer savvy. Everybody may not have access to a computer or have access to the internet. We have a resource center. That is what we're there to do. And we're also going to go out into the field as well. We accept invitations. For example, we are going to be in Wotton playing field on the 28th, and that's an invitation from the Barbados Trust Loan Fund. So we know we can't do it on our own, so we're willing to partner with other agencies to get the word out there. And that way, once you get on the register, you will be seen. And our job then is to go there and get more employers onto the platform. So that's a quick summary of where we are right now.
And I just conclude by restating our commitment to working with the Immigration Department, supplying the information. We also, maybe I should also use the opportunity to encourage employers to recognize their duty to the community in which they're located. And I refer to Barbados as opposed to individual spaces within Barbados. Their commitment to the country and commitment to providing decent work for those who are working and those who are looking for work in Barbados.
Minister, I want to thank you and your officers for the reaffirmed commitment to sensitizing the public about the need for them to register, because it was a little difficult for me to digest the fact that in Barbados, with the demands for work, that we can't find those persons, the office assistants, chefs, persons with computer literacy skills. It's a little hard for me to understand and appreciate it, but I thank you for your response in terms of working with the Ministry of Home Affairs and et cetera. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come in again. And the question that I have to ask relates to what I would frame as a whole of government approach and the Ministry of Labor's role in a whole of government approach. Specifically, the relationship between the Ministry of Labor and how it functions with corporate affairs, how it functions with home affairs. From a corporate affairs perspective, I think of people who are companies that are starting up a business for the first time. Doesn't have to be a new company operating within the labor market space, but it might be a company or a group that's opening up a new company. It might be a entirely new company coming on the scene. And why I asked about how Ministry of Labor relates to corporate affairs, because as the Assistant Chief Labor Officer was speaking earlier this morning, it occurred to me that I should raise the point that especially where you have complaints coming from people that their companies are not meeting the requirements of a minimum wage, that shouldn't require a person to have to call in or write in to say my company is not paying a minimum wage. If there were a relationship, or if there is a relationship with business registered, then there should be an opportunity presented to itself for the Labor Department to go to these businesses and make sure that their wages and salary schedule or so on complies with the minimum requirements of the law. So I would like to hear the ministry respond to that. Only last week, I had someone who was indicating to me that a youngster, 18 years old, working 40 hours a week, and she's thinking she's not getting the $10.50 minimum wage. Of course, we know it's not $10.50, it's now $10.71 per hour. But working 40 hours and falling well below, less than $400 a week. So I would want to hear from the ministry how it relates to new business setups.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. This would be a new idea for us to think about. This is not something in terms of, right, I'm referring to when a business is registered, immediately going, if I'm understanding the Honourable Member correctly, once it is registered, immediately going to make sure that they're doing things in the correct way. Right, so at this point, we don't do that, even though we have a relationship with corporate affairs, but not at the level where once a business is registered, that we are informed so that we can go and check to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do. Now, I am not able to respond to say how we could get that to work, except that I am aware that the Companies Act, there's supposed to be some work to amend or to modernize the Companies Act. And maybe there may be some scope when we're working through the Companies Act to allow for that information sharing so that we can be, and I think this is what you're asking about, proactive rather than reacting after to hear that there's a complaint. I could also see how that could be helpful in a situation, and we're seeing some of these, but I think they've always happened. I happen to be part of an organization many years ago that did something similar, where the organization that is the employer on record is not the same organization, the same legal entity that is operating the business. Getting information from Business Barbados, formerly CAIPO, Corporate Affairs, Intellectual Property Office, would likely help us in those situations because we'll know up front what the nature of the organization is. Is it operating Is it that they're hiring persons and then charging management fee, but part of the same group, who the directors are? That is information that would be helpful for us, because there are times now when, as we pursue matters, we find out that the organization running the actual business, the actual day-to-day operation, is not the name of the organization that comes up on the pay slip. So we do see that, and I'm thankful for that intervention by the Honourable Member for St. George North. It is something that we have not, to this point, pursued, but I give the undertaking that it is something that we will pursue, because I think we can see how it could be helpful to avoid challenges, but also when challenges come, or if they come, to know, to have an idea of the lay of the land, so that we can go to where we need to go to make sure that we can dispense justice and address labor market issues and industrial relations issues that may come up. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, and there's no charge. But related to that as well, the questions sought to address new startups and so on to ensure compliance where we don't have to be reactive. And I use the minimum wage as an example, but of course that would not be the only thing. It would be to make sure that minimum standards are in place so that the officers have to be less reactive to complaints. But during the past 5 years, and in your brief at the top of the presentation, you made mention of the Labor Concessions Act, and you made mention of labor contracts and so on. We recognize that there's more that needs to be done on the labor contract side. But the question that is often asked is whether or not, or to what extent, is the Labor Department actually monitoring to ensure that the provisions of those pieces of legislation, very recent, are being honored. In the case of the labor contracts, that where there is a contract being awarded to some person who is doing business on behalf of government, that that person is meeting the minimum standards in tourism as it relates to concessions, and in construction as it relates to rates, that they are meeting the standards. We know we have the provisions there, but how is it being monitored, or is it being monitored? And I will say that some complaints suggest to us that it might not be monitored effectively if it is being monitored. So just to add that component as well.
Right, so thank you very much again, Honourable Member. The matter of monitoring, at this point, we monitor based on complaints raised, so that I'll allow the acting chief labor officer to share some of those. I think there were, no, that was a recent cabinet paper, but the information from a recent cabinet paper where we shared with cabinet, or will be sharing with cabinet, the number of complaints, nature of complaints, those kinds of things. Now, so far, so we've done 2 quarters of that kind of reporting, July to September and October to December. And all of the issues raised have been investigated, pursued, and none are outstanding or to the level that would call for, even for us to speak to the Ministry of Tourism, because that is under the tourism component. We will report the breaches, the unresolved breaches, to the Ministry of Tourism, the granting organization, granting of concessions organization, or ministry, and they will then make the decision on withdrawing. So we haven't had issues to that level. It suggests to me that implementing the legislation seems to have had, to some degree, the desired effect. Because no company enjoying, I use that word deliberately, enjoying concessions would want to lose those concessions. Now, the other thing, particularly with respect to construction, about 3 to 4 times every year, we write to every ministry, every permanent secretary, every minister, every permanent secretary, the head of every department, the head of every agency, the head of every state-owned enterprise or commercial state-owned enterprise, to remind them, because as a ministry, we do not trust people to remember. So we write to remind them about 3 to 4 times a year of the requirement of the legislation, that they are to ensure that those who they are awarding contracts to are treating people properly, to use how we would say in Rose Hill. We remind them that it is a requirement of the law, that they have to make sure that people are being treated properly, and we keep reminding them of that. I will also say to you that we are in the process, and that was one of the items mentioned under the continuing. The Labor Clauses Public Contracts Act also needs more teeth, and we are in the final stages. I'm not sure if it is the final draft that we've gotten, but we're close to a final draft of that legislation, of the amendments to that legislation, because even though the legislation can do a decent job at this point, there is a requirement for more teeth to that legislation. And so that is something that we are pretty close to finalizing. Again, maybe a little bit too long standing, but we're close to finalizing that, and I believe in the next, by mid-year, mid-calendar year, we should have those amendments before the Honourable Chamber. If I step back a little bit to the new entrants, I actually forgot something that we've discussed in the ministry and started to reach out on, but haven't done it fully. We've spoken about working, I know we had some initial discussions, but working with Invest Barbados so that new entrants coming into the country, so this would not now deal with people in country starting a business, but people coming in from the outside to set up businesses. We started to work on putting together some information that is absolutely necessary for employers coming into the country to know. And we can see it based on the challenges that we get from time to time. We know where some of those areas are. We are also very, very cognizant of the fact that as capital moves around between countries, among countries, that you have some level of impact in terms of the culture of doing things. So we see things happening in Barbados in recent years, last maybe 20 years, between last 20 years and now, that we will say that that's not how we do things in Barbados. But because of the fluidity of capital and its movement, these are issues that we have to confront. And one of the ways of confronting, we believe, is to speak to potential investors at that point when they are kind of finalizing their decision, working with Invest Barbados to come into the country. And so that is something that we're also going to pursue to make sure, we started to put together the information already, but to make sure we have a proper agreement with Invest Barbados so that once an organization makes that decision, we're going to set up shop, that part of the process is almost like an orientation, but that we share with them the practice of industrial relations in Barbados, the practice of occupational safety and health, and those two areas which contribute to the industrial relations climate in the country.
Thanks, and that's very useful information. And raise, as I said before, not only within the context of the labor concessions, but the labor contracts, and I would wish that we could see that hasten, because not only from the complaints coming from workers themselves, but workers' representatives And particularly, I'm aware of the largest worker representative in the private sector, making very strong appeals as it relates to that issue of labor contracts, because we are aware, and I would say as our members in this honorable chamber, that there are some in construction, for instance, who are not following the minimum requirements of decency and fairness, but who continue to benefit from public contracts. And when workers in those areas see it, and when members of the public see it, an issue, that particular issue raises questions around accountability, worker confidence in the labor market system, and it is recognized that there is exploitation of the system by employers who see the weaknesses and the cracks too, who see lack of monitoring and enforcement and timely resolution to things as an opportunity for them to go ahead and do it. By the time they get around to checking us, the contract will be up and we will be looking for another one. So I think it is important to address these things and not to be speaking, as I said, to another team in the present continuous on these things, but to have them arrested and in quick time. Very related to that comment, therefore, is the question as it relates to Home Affairs. How are we relating better to the Ministry of Home Affairs? Because recently, a number of people, I think it was last week, Friday, were sending me that a new hotel that is setting up is asking for a director of finance. And they say, we don't educate our people at university anymore. People not getting ACCAs in Barbados anymore. So is there any improvement in the relationship, or does your ministry have any concerns about how notices for skills are being advertised and responded to through the Ministry of Home Affairs?
The relationship, thank you again, Honourable Member. The relationship, I think, continues to be a good one. The question, though, may be more how rigorous is the process. Now, we get a request for information, we give the information. The decision lies with the Ministry of Home Affairs. I know one of the things that we have asked Home Affairs to do, this is in the past, is to publish, because successive ministries of Home Affairs have indicated correctly to us that not every time you see an application, the work permit is granted. The challenge is that the public doesn't know that, and the ministry that I lead doesn't know that, because once we've done our part, then nobody comes back to us with the decision. I think for transparency's sake, that we need to have some kind of idea that 2 out of every 5 is declined, or 4 out of every 5 is declined, some understanding so that we are confident in the process. So the relationship is good, to answer the specific question, but taking it a little beyond, we will, with the, as we move forward, ask again for some greater transparency with respect to knowing, I mean, even if the public knows statistics, it would actually be good for the ministry responsible for the labor market and its effective operation to know more specifics in terms of, well, this one was turned down, this wasn't, that kind of thing. So we will attempt to deepen that relationship. Now, I want to use this opportunity, and I'm using this opportunity to appeal to the members on the front bench, on the front benches, to pay careful attention, even though ministers don't have direct involvement. We have a political responsibility to the people who elected us, and I encourage all persons who lead in ministries pay attention to the award of contracts. Now, one of the things, and I think you kind of hinted, Honourable Member, to this, what we cannot afford in this country is to create a moral hazard. We cannot have a situation where the people who do not play by the rules benefit at the expense of those who do. I saw this happen in construction long before I was interested in politics. I saw, and I was able to make the comparison because we were doing a redevelopment of a hotel property that I was helping to manage, and I saw we had different companies working. I could see the difference in approach, the difference in treatment. And I will say to you, one of the things that has hurt me over the years, and I still remain hurt by it, is that the decent company eventually went out of business. The decent company eventually went out of business. And that was because the other company could cut some corners and do some funny stuff, don't pay no national insurance, those kinds of things, and then are able to undercut their competitors. Barbados cannot afford that. And every head of agency, every head of SOE, every head of department, every permanent secretary, and every minister of government has a responsibility to make sure that the bad guys don't win. We have a responsibility so that when the ministry sends out those reminders, I am always careful to forward them, when I'm aware, I will forward them to ministerial colleagues because we have a responsibility to ensure good behavior in our country. I will share something that came to my attention and the attention of the National Insurance and Social Security Service. They are obligated never to make sure it never happens again. You will have construction companies who have 5 masons, 3 carpenters, a plumber, an electrician on staff. They will be paying them regularly and deducting and remitting national insurance. On a project, they will have 20 other masons, 30 laborers, many other persons working on the project. But when inspectors go, they will say, well, no, my employees have, no, they're under the Social Security system. And in the ministry that I lead, we have made it clear that you cannot hide behind that kind of, it's not even a veneer, it's a nasty piece of work. To approach the Social Security, the future of workers in that kind of way. And I've made it clear to the Inspectorate and the Compliance Section at the National Insurance and Social Security Service that that is not going to be allowed to be a cloak to blind or to blindside our officers with respect to ensuring compliance. The Labor Clauses Public Contracts Act speaks to subcontractors, whether they are misclassified or not. If you call a person a subcontractor, the main contractor has the same responsibility to make sure that all the statutory and other obligations are fulfilled as with your own people. So there is no issue where that is concerned. And that is why we will be moving to have the matter of construction, not just in relation to public contracts, but we realize that we have to make sure across the board that the sometimes bad behavior that we see is brought to a screeching halt. And we're going to be working on making sure that what now obtains in construction for public contracts extends to all areas of operation. The National Insurance and Social Security Service have been mandated to make sure that we ensure that everybody who should be participating in the National Insurance Fund or contributing to the National Insurance Fund, participating in the National Insurance Scheme, do so. No excuses.
Minister, I would want to applaud you, and I believe you because I know that we have had conversations, and I know that we are on the same page. But the thing is, government moves too slowly in ensuring compliance. And I don't only refer to the Labor Department because ministries will know who the bad behaved people, to use your language, not mine, who the bad behaved people are. And we still keep seeing the bad behaved people. So then the good behaved ones feel like they could try a thing too. And then the system then diminishes itself to the lowest common denominator, and that's where the problem is in this country in too many respects. I personally, as a representative, don't want to see any of the bad behaved ones in my constituency doing any work for me. And I say that boldly because I know, like many of us in here, who the bad behaved ones are too. So whenever we raise the question, and this is my final follow-up, when we raise the question about an absence of skills in this country, this is where we find a disconnect, because we will hear that enough people, enough skills are not available, and people are saying they want to work, but they're not going to work under certain conditions. There's a lot of public mistrust in terms of what would be a genuine appeal to the country, that people have to update skills and so on. And it is all of these things that we were discussing, they are very much related. Like when you see all these advertisements coming out, and then there's no follow-up report so that you can say whether these things were turned down or not. When people see bad behaved employers benefiting from public contracts first and foremost and still getting through, when complaints seem to be for the Labor Department, the system for inordinate periods of times and people can get no recourse, all of these things come together to make people mistrust the system. And one of the reasons why I do this is to hopefully be able to help us to bring it together in a more seamless way, but it requires honesty and upfrontness and forthrightness from all of us, because all of us serve the same people in the same country who are being undermined. So in closing, I want to, on the jobs registry bit of it, I think is positive, is a positive step in terms of getting people to put their skills out there, getting employers to also register so that they can benefit from the skills. But I sincerely believe that enough is not being done to promote it. You don't launch something and it's new and you expect it's going to take off. And the numbers we're hearing is nowhere near where it should be, because we're emphasizing this is not people who are unemployed only and want work. But in Barbados, we have a serious problem of underemployment. And people across all levels of work should be encouraged that the jobs registry is the place, not a politician first and foremost when they have their meetings in their constituencies, but the job registry is the place that I should submit my CV, where I will have decent employers on the other side that are looking to give decent work to decent and productive workers. So we hope that we would be able to see this. And so my recommendation is not only when trust loan, the trust fund invites and so on, but we have to aggressively go into some PR to make our citizens aware that this opportunity is available to them, and that is both employees and employers, so that they won't have, in the case of employers, so that they won't have to feel that they have to waste space in a paper advertising for positions that cannot be granted because we have the skills here in Barbados. So that's where I would want to close.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. And just let me say that we commit to doing more with respect to the marketing. You also mentioned the getting Barbadians comfortable that all these different interventions really work. Now, I spoke to the Immigration Department through the Ministry of Home Affairs, sharing information. But I also have to say, because in our ministry, we tend to be very real with ourselves, and we accept our responsibilities. And accepting that responsibility also means that we not just ask Ministry of Home Affairs and the Immigration Department to share information with the public, but we also have to share information in terms of the use of the Barbados Job Register, so that the number that was shared earlier, 43, the public doesn't know that. But the public needs to know that as far as our records show, 43 persons have used and been successful. Other persons, obviously there are other applications that are CVs that are in the system, but that they're real people who have benefited. And if that information is not known, if it is not shared with the public, then it may be seen as another hole. You know, well, this is send it there, you send it there, but nothing gonna happen kind of thing. We want people to be able to trust the system or recognize that the system can work for them. And the only way that's gonna happen is if we share the information. And so the second commitment that we make is publishing publicly the work of the Barbados Job Register. Now, the director spoke to the fact that we know that our information is not going to be complete, because just like members of parliament, everybody who you help don't come back to tell you, oh, I got through. And the same will happen with the Barbados Job Register, but we will share the information that we have. We will not allow the pursuit of perfection to stop us from doing something good. And we will share that information so that people know that the job register works.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Honourable Minister. We will now take Christchurch South.
Thank you, Chair.
Which is the final person in this debate, after which Minister will come back to you and allow you to do your wrap-up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, on behalf of the Honourable Member for St. George North, let me thank you for those commitments that you have made in respect of the job registry. Yes, you didn't give any timelines, but we note the commitments. Minister, it's clear that you and your ministry is lifting up some big things for Barbados, having to do with protection of workers' rights, the capacity building within the NGO sector, and importantly, how we make sure that we have a fairly peaceful labor environment. And one of the mechanisms that we know that lies under your ministry for doing so is the social partnership. The head for that, sub-program 0156, the Secretariat for Social Partners, I note under 212 operating expenses, you had an approved estimates for 2025-2026 of 274,000, revised estimate of 100,000, but your budget estimates for 2026-2027 is 540,000, which is a substantial increase. Could you let us know what it is that you're going to be doing differently within the coming financial year under this particular budget line and with that increase?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The revised estimates for 25-26, 100,000, we burst long time ago. So the estimate for the coming fiscal year is a more realistic one. Now, every time we hold a meeting, either of the full committee or the subcommittee, or we have included, for example, I think we had 2 meetings with respect to construction. Those are all under the subhead of Secretariat for Social Partners. There are going to be meetings of the subcommittee and the full committee We know, for example, that, so I talk about construction. We had a number of meetings with respect to the drafting of the protocol, but there is also it just slipped my mind. There's another area of work, with respect to crime and criminal justice, well, addressing crime. There were quite a number of those meetings in the current fiscal, and those are going to continue. We're past the election period and settling back, so that there will be those engagements, and the engagements, particularly with respect to crime and fighting crime, were larger engagements than normal. And believe me, they cost. They cost. Sometimes I am a little bit amazed at the prices, but we have a permanent secretary now who is a former chief budget analyst, so she is extremely knowledgeable. She hasn't spoken only because she's only just become the acting permanent secretary, as in like a week? Yes, only 1 week. But coming from budget, so we know that the money is going to be well taken care of. But I will tell you that we went way over the current estimates, the revised estimates for 25-26, because of the number of meetings. So if I kind of break it down, the social partnership addresses the major issues. They will continue to address the matter of crime and criminal justice and stopping people from getting involved in crime and criminal activity. The subcommittee also meets, the subcommittee of the social partnership. We have met quite a bit with respect to drafting the protocol, because a new protocol is overdue. We have a draft of Protocol 7. The discussion, there will be some discussion which will go into the new financial year regarding the matter of how, there are a number of documents we prepared, a full protocol, an abridged version, and then an executive summary. They have to be approved, so there will be meetings, and in those meetings, there will be discussion on these matters, but all those have to be paid for, because we got to use the space somewhere. We don't have the space in the ministry, so we have either to go to, we've used Lord Erskine Sanford Center, we've used the gymnasium, we have used Hilton. We have to find space to hold these meetings, and like I said, there's a cost attached to those. So the full committee, the subcommittee, and then there are also have been meetings and will continue to be meetings where the social partnership, because there are a number of things that operate under the rubric of the social partnership. The Declaration of Mission Barbados, to a significant degree, operates under that umbrella. We were the ministry responsible for coordinating its preparation, and while it is headed by the head of the public service, the meetings end up with us. I almost said on our plate, but that might be appropriate because we have to pay for every plate. And that's where a lot of the cost is in food and beverage, along with the rental of the space. So this speaks to a more realistic, as opposed to a significant increase in number of meetings. And the expense under this head is mainly meetings. Mainly meetings.
Chair, through you, Minister, I thank you so very much for that, but we would not want to give the impression that the majority of the work under that head is just only meetings. And I know that there's substantive work that is happening within the social partnership of itself. And could you speak to, therefore, what have been some of the key outputs from the social partnership that continues to justify its existence?
One of them, thank you, Honourable Member, one of them is the level of industrial relations harmony in spite of the challenges that we face from time to time. So, to put it another way, it could be a lot worse. But the social partnership allows us to work together. So that, for example, when we establish a national minimum wage, that is social partnership work. Because the committee, the minimum wage committee, minimum wage board, is comprised of social partners, government, employers, workers. So that is some of the work. They're engaged now in a couple of things. One is the construction matter that I spoke to. So we want to move it from simply a labor clauses, public contracts matter, and put it under the minimum wage, so it applies to everybody. They're also working on indexing. You will recall that the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance, I think 2 budgets ago, spoke to the indexing. Or was it last year? I don't recall. But the indexing is annual 2%, but every 3 years, there is to be an assessment. What the minimum wage board is doing, they're pretty advanced on that, is working on the mechanism that will constitute the assessment, so that you see in the 3rd year, where are we plug in, we've built a model, maybe an econometric model, we are able to plug in the numbers, we see the impact, and we know what we have to do in the 3rd year, outside of the other 2 years of the 2%. So that is another area of work of the social partnership. The social partnership also addresses, to a very significant degree, our relationship with the International Labour Organization. And we have, and I repeat it now, we are one of the few countries, and maybe the smallest country, to have membership of the governing body, directing the policy of the International Labour Organization, with all 3 social partners involved. Many countries have, outside of the countries of chief economic importance, have maybe a worker rep and a government rep. Well, everybody has a government rep. Well, no, not everybody. There are, 26? I don't remember the number, I think 26 or 52. The regular and the other members, the regular and I don't remember the other term. But all reports that come from a member state to the ILO regarding how we are implementing a particular standard, international standard that we have signed up for. All of those reports are deliberated on and approved by the social partnership, not in the full social partnership, but in a committee called, we refer to it as the C144 committee. The C144 is an international convention, a convention of the International Labour Organization that speaks to the tripartite nature of the relationship between the member state and the International Labour Organization. And every report that goes to the International Labour Organization on our, let me use the word behavior, since we've used that quite a number of times already, on how we're behaving with respect to living up to the expectation after having ratified a convention or protocol. The report has to be looked at by the social partners. So the social partnership is at work in the C144 committee. It's a tripartite committee made up of the social partners, and the report has to go through them. They have to agree before it can be sent off to the International Labour Organization. So outside of the areas that I referred to before, which are, we may consider areas of significant national importance, we did it with respect to the pandemic. We are doing it with respect to crime. We are doing it as well with respect to construction. Outside of those, there are those other areas that I mentioned that constitute the work of the social partnership. What I'll mention finally, I spoke to industrial relations harmony. And that may sound strange, and there's a reason why I'm going back to it. It may sound strange given that we still hear of industrial relations issues. But like I say, it could be a lot worse. And one of the reasons why it is not worse is because when issues reach a boiling point, they are brought to the subcommittee of the social partnership. So I know, for example, and the Honourable Member President George North will remember, there was a very, an essential service, which just before Christmas, I think of 2024, said to us, and I chair the subcommittee of the social partnership, that this is going to boil over if it is not addressed immediately. Before he had a chance to say anything, not the honorable member for St. George North, but the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union said, and we will be with you. So I knew at that point that you got to put your foot on the gas. I had to put my foot on the gas to make sure that the relevant meetings were held so that we are able to keep the country together. And those are some of the areas where the subcommittee has, been able to intervene, make a difference. And at the level of the subcommittee, at the level of the full social partnership, at the level of the constituents, government, employers, and workers, there is never an expectation that there will not be tensions in the relationship. There will always be tensions in the relationship. The construct of the social partnership allows us to handle those tensions, and even when tensions boil over to straight-out disagreements and even industrial action, it still allows us to use the mechanisms available to resolve the issues. But what we do is that, with respect to, I don't want to say regular, but I can't think of a different word, regular industrial relations matters, they go through the process, domestic level, then Labor Department through a Labor officer, then, if necessary, maybe escalated to the Chief Labor Officer, and after that, if it still is unresolved, to the Minister. That is a process, but there is also the interventions that happen at the level of the subcommittee of the social partnership. There have been situations where some worker organizations were not, and I think this is an appropriate place to say, were not being given time of day by some ministries, officers in some ministries, asking for meetings, not getting meetings. The role of my ministry, myself as chair of the subcommittee, is that once we leave those meetings, we make immediate contact with the relevant ministries and we say, this has been brought to the attention of the subcommittee of the social partnership, you are to have a meeting. And then I speak not as minister responsible for labor, but as the chairman of the subcommittee of the social partnership. So we've been able to head off what could potentially have been significant issues through the work of the social partnership. But the work of the social partnership, and the protocol speaks to this, the role of the social partnership does not stop, negate, diminish the work of the Labor Department. The Labor Department still has its work, but the subcommittee of the social partnership addresses matters that could become major national concerns.
Thank you for that, Minister. My final question, and I thank you for that final comment in terms of, I guess, that relationship between the Labor Department and the social partnership, because that was something I wanted to interrogate a little bit further. But I'll move on from there, though. You talk about that issues of tension, and it could be even worse. And, the world is turning, a little bit oddly at times. As workers become more educated, as businesses push even further for leaner operations and look for, in their eyes, perhaps the cheapest labor, those tensions, I suggest, become even a little bit more strident. So how are we intending to strengthen then the social partnership even further? I mean, this is a mechanism that we've been using for some time. So are there any plans for us to make sure, again, that it can continue in its relevance by strengthening it in any way?
The strengthening will come out of the matters that it addresses and delivers on. I do know that the ministry responsible for economic affairs, which is also responsible for productivity, will, and I think the member may have mentioned it this morning, but the ministry will be working in the area of productivity. Now, that productivity is an area that the social partnership applied itself to I think it was probably before the onset of COVID. So I believe it would have been in 2018 going into 2019. Working on productivity is a matter that the social partners will be taking. It is included in the draft for Protocol 7, but it is a work that the social partnership will be engaged in. And that is because to agree on measures and targets and what it is we're going to do requires that government workers and employers are on the same page or on a similar page. So that productivity also impacts costs of doing business from the perspective of bottom line, because you're speaking to companies making decisions based on bottom line and where to go to get. Barbados is never going to be the cheapest with respect to wage rates. Our cost of living does not allow for that, and that is not a 20, 25, 24, 23 thing. This goes back many decades. Barbados has not been the least cost when it comes to wages. We will therefore have to differentiate ourselves on productivity. We will also have to differentiate ourselves in niche areas that are high value or higher value areas, so that the social partnership, as it addresses these kinds of matters, will focus on productivity, but they will also, as they participate in the People Development Advisory Council, because that is also multi-partite, including the social partners. As we look at the skill sector councils, as we look at the jobs and skills of the future, as we work with the Ministry of Educational Transformation and the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training, we, as a partnership, working together, the social partners, will be putting our heads together so that we address the areas where we can have a comparative advantage, even if you don't have a competitive advantage. A comparative advantage from the perspective of the value of what we deliver. Just use an example, because I don't want to sound too it's not a complicated thing. We talked about, many years ago, Ceylon cotton. So there's cotton and there's Ceylon cotton. Ceylon cotton can command a higher return because of its quality, that kind of thing. That is what we're going to need to focus on, because we are not going to be price competitive with respect to the cost of a person's labor. Not with Latin America, Central or South, not with Asia. So there's always that risk of organizations moving their operations. We saw that, and I was a little boy at the time, with Intel. People still talk about Intel. That is something that we have to work on, but the social partnership is going to be important in helping us to work through the matter of productivity, how are we going to approach improvements in productivity so that Barbados remains competitive. So it will be a significant part of the work of the social partnership. And just maybe to add, there is no group of public officers that are social partnership officers. The ministry coordinates the work of the social partnership, of the various components of the social partnership. And coming out of that, there may be committees that are put together of social partners that are serviced by persons in the ministry. There's a servicing of, and this is not in my ministry, this is in the ministry, this is in the area included of the head of the public service. The matter of the missions serviced by the ministry, but you'll be familiar with that, Ministry of the Public Service. So the ministry will service committees, but the social partnership is a body that deliberates. I'm not certain yet where BERT 3.0 will fall, but I know that social partners I think there's going to be a similar structure where social partners are part of the monitoring. It was actually called the Burke Monitoring Committee. I'm not sure if that is what it will be called, but that function, again, will be done by social partners, but there will be a ministry. If it is not the ministry, including the head of the civil service, it will be the one that I have the honor to lead, who will actually service the ministry. And that is the reason why you see operating expenses, but you don't see statutory personal emoluments or OP or OPE in this. It is all on the operating expenses. The servicing comes through general management.
Thank you, Chair. Arrest.
Thank you. Honorable member, you do have 5 minutes to wrap up.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And allow me, on behalf of the team that I have the honor to lead, and I say it is a good team. I'm not going to identify anybody because it seems as though when I identify people as being good, somebody from the Ministry of Public Service might be listening, and then they are spirited away. So I will speak to the team generally. The team is a good team. I'm not sure they like me as much as I like them, but we work well together, and I push them sometimes a little bit too hard. But this team has delivered, in my view, for the people of Barbados. This has not been a minister delivery system. This has been a team system, and in all areas of the work of the ministry, the officers have been fully involved and have worked hard to make sure that we are where we are, delivering for the people of Barbados in terms of making sure that there are protections. The team is also a very realistic team, so we recognize that there is unfinished business. I indicated those areas because when we are in management meeting, there is free flow of discussion. So it is not really minister and officers, it is everybody talking. And we all know, because we're honest with each other, we know where the challenges are, where we need to do better. And that is the reason why I was able to share openly and fully the areas of unfinished business, those that we've started to work on. To the Honourable Member for Christchurch South and St. George North, I am aware of the commitments that I have made, and having some moral compass, we will be working very diligently to make sure we fulfill the commitments that we have made. We have delivered in areas that relate to the protection of workers on the legal side. We have delivered with respect to remuneration. There is the matter raised in our manifesto, which I touched on in terms of new areas of work, which I'd like to mention here. The matter of a living wage. We acknowledge that the Barbados Workers Union has been, I probably could use the word vociferous. I think that describes the Barbados Workers Union, but in advocating for a living wage. Now, this is on the agenda, and I want to end with this. This is on the agenda to some degree, not only, but to some degree, because we have recognized that with the setting of a minimum wage, which is essentially a wage that allows a worker, in my words, to keep body and soul together. But there have been employers who, with the increase in the minimum wage, have reduced hours, so that there are some people who are going home with the same amount of money that they were going home with before the increase in the minimum wage. One of the last times I spoke to the media about this matter, I said to the country through them, do not push the government to move from an hourly wage to a weekly wage. This government, and the Prime Minister is always very clear about this, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, she will often say to us as members of the Cabinet that she is the head of a Labour Party. I am a minister responsible for labour, for workers, and it will not go unnoticed or unattended if, as we try to allow workers to keep up with the cost of living, to realize that we are back to square one. And so I say very clearly to all who would care to hear that we are going to make sure that the workers of this country are not disadvantaged, that they are at least able to keep up with any increases at the price level. The ministry does not accept that the primary driver of price increases in supermarkets, hardware stores, and other places relate to wages. Almost every decent economist in this country recognizes that much of our inflation is imported. That's what economists refer to as imported inflation. So that the same challenges that people across the US have, that the people in the United Kingdom have, we're having with respect to the cost of items. The people who work in establishments must be able to afford to eat. They must be able to afford to pay their light bill, their water bill. They must be able to send school their children. And we will make sure that that happens. And so I encourage right-thinking persons. We have set the dates for the indexation so that the issues that arose last January and the June before that will not arise in the future. Everybody knows what will happen in January of 2027. So it will not be a surprise. We plan our business, we develop our business models to suit what we know is going to happen. The increase is a not insignificant, but not humongous increase, 2%. But we have to make sure, Mr. Chairman, that those who work in establishments have all the elements of decent work. And one of the principal elements of decent work is a wage that can sustain you and can sustain your dependents. My ministry, myself and all the officers who work in the ministry are determined to do that. That is why we work toward decent work in Barbados. That is why we look for opportunities outside of Barbados as well, including with teachers. So I don't want persons at the Ministry of Education to think that we are teething out teachers. But there are a lot of people in Barbados who want to be teachers. And there are opportunities for a few to have experience outside. The idea is to allow people to reach their maximum in terms of fulfilling their desires, reaching their capacity. And we will continue to do that. We will make sure that our work recognizes the twin areas that I spoke to, protection and production. One can't work without the other. So we cannot protect to the detriment of the country's economy, and we cannot be so focused on the country's economy that we do not protect the workers who are the drivers of the gains that we see. And so, Mr. Chairman, that is our summary. We recommit ourselves to the task that has been assigned to us, and we will continue to work hard to make sure that Barbados advances, that we develop, and that every worker, every third sector organization, every faith-based organization is a part of that work so that Barbados truly becomes the best place to work, to contribute, and ultimately to retire. With that, Mr. Chair, I beg again that Head 84 stand part.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again. Or he didn't?
Honorable Leader of Government Business, let me
Yeah,
put the
clearly.
question first. The question is that this head 84 stand par. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Someone has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the House be suspended until tomorrow, the 10th of March at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber will be suspended until Tuesday, the 10th of March, 2026, at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until tomorrow, Tuesday, the 10th of March, 2026, at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.